All right, everyone, get ready because we are going deep today, deep into trauma resolution.
Ooh, sounds intense.
It can be, but we've got an awesome guide for this one. Licensed therapist Vinny Strumolo.
Oh, yeah, I've seen his stuff online. Seems like a really insightful guy.
Absolutely, and we've got a bunch of his blog posts to dig into, even a YouTube conversation where he really gets into the nitty-gritty.
Nice.
Now, you specifically asked about how to know when you've actually moved past trauma, not just like covered it up with a Band-Aid.
Right, right, because those Band-Aid solutions never really last, do they?
Nope, they just kind of keep things bubbling under the surface.
Exactly.
So that's our mission today, figuring out what real trauma resolution looks like. And thankfully, Vidi's got some great insights to help us with that.
Yeah, and you know what I found really interesting in his work? He doesn't limit trauma to those like capital T trauma events.
You mean like war or major accidents?
Yeah, exactly. He actually uses this analogy with spicy food.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
He says it's like one person's jalapeno is another person's ghost pepper.
Aha. I get it. So what might be totally manageable for one person could completely overwhelm someone else.
Exactly. And he actually includes things like divorce, car accidents, even natural disasters in his definition of what can be traumatic.
Wow. Okay, so it's really more about how you experience the event, not necessarily what the event itself is.
Exactly. It's not about comparing your struggles to someone else's. What matters is how it affected you.
That's a good point, because I think it's easy to get caught up in that comparison game, you know? Like, oh, well, my problem isn't as bad as what they went through, so I shouldn't be so affected by it.
Right, but Vinny's saying that's not how it works. Trauma is subjective. If your emotional wiring makes a breakup feel like the end of the world, then that's valid trauma for you.
That makes so much sense. It takes the pressure off of having to have, like, the right reactions to something.
It does. He even uses this example. There was a woman in her 40s, super successful in her career, but anytime her boss gave her even like mild criticism, she would just burst into tears.
Oh, wow.
Turns out she had this really harsh teacher when she was a kid. And so any sort of disapproval from an authority figure would trigger this huge emotional response.
That's kind of heartbreaking.
It is. And that actually ties into another one of his key concepts, the emotional age freeze.
Ooh, I've heard him talk about that. It sounds kind of scary.
It can be. Basically, the idea is that when you experience trauma, a part of you can get stuck at the age you were when it happened.
So, like, even though you grow up and get older, chronologically, there's this part of you that's still that scared kid or that hurt teenager.
Yeah, exactly. And that can obviously create all sorts of problems in adult life, especially when it comes to relationships and how you react to stress.
Okay, so we're starting to get a clearer picture of what trauma is, but how about the whole resolution part? Like, how do we know when we've actually healed from it?
Right. Well, Vinny's pretty clear about what resolution isn't.
Okay, lay it on me.
He's adamant that simply letting time pass isn't enough. Like, time might help soften the edges a bit, but it doesn't necessarily lead to true healing.
So it's not just about waiting for the pain to fade away.
Nope. And he also says that making external changes isn't enough either. Like, getting a new job, moving to a new city, those things can be helpful, but they're not the solution in and of themselves.
I guess it makes sense. If you're just running away from your problems, they're going to follow you wherever you go.
Exactly. He compares it to people who hop from relationship to relationship without ever dealing with their own baggage.
Oh, yeah. So each new relationship just brings up the same old patterns and hurts.
Exactly. It's like those external changes are just band-aids. They might make you feel better temporarily, but they don't address the underlying wound.
Okay, so if time and external changes aren't the answer, then what is? What does true trauma resolution look like, according to Vinny?
Well, he actually had this really powerful aha moment himself after struggling with the death of a loved one for years.
Oh, wow, what happened?
He described this constant knot in his stomach that he just lived with for years, and then one day it was just gone.
Really? Just like that?
Yeah, he said it was like something fundamentally shifted within him. He realized that true healing wasn't about forgetting or pretending the pain didn't exist, but about reaching a place where it no longer had this hold over him.
That's pretty incredible. I actually know exactly what he means about that knot in your stomach. I felt that after a bad breakup, and it is wild how much emotional pain can manifest physically.
It really is.
But it makes me wonder, like, how do you get to that point? Is it all about therapy?
Therapy is definitely a key part of the process, he says, but it starts with self-awareness.
Okay, so like being able to recognize how your past is affecting your present, even in subtle ways.
Exactly. Like noticing those negative thoughts and beliefs that might stem from trauma, like I'm not good enough or it's all my fault.
Yeah, I could see how those thought patterns could really keep you stuck.
Absolutely. And that's where Vinny emphasizes the importance of alone time.
Really. But isn't the tendency to want to avoid being alone when you're dealing with those difficult emotions?
It can be, but he's not talking about wallowing or isolating yourself. It's more about giving yourself the space to reflect and process without distractions.
So, like creating that quiet space where you can actually hear those whispers from your past.
Yes, exactly. Because if you're constantly surrounded by noise and busyness, you're never going to be able to tune in to what's really going on inside.
That's such a great point. It's like you need that stillness to even begin to unpack all that baggage.
And this is where it gets even more interesting. While we're talking about those deeper issues, one thing that really stood out to me in Vinny's work was this connection he saw between unresolved trauma and addiction.
Yeah, I could see how that would make sense. If you're carrying all that pain around, it seems natural to want to numb it somehow.
Exactly. And that's kind of how he sees it. Like people are self-medicating with substances to try and quiet those echoes of trauma from the past.
That makes sense, but isn't that a bit of an oversimplification? I mean, addiction's a really complex issue, right?
Oh, absolutely. And Vinny acknowledges that for sure. He's very clear that there's a strong physiological component to addiction.
Right, so it's not just a matter of willpower or anything like that.
No, not at all. But what he stresses is that even when that physiological component is there, resolving the underlying trauma is crucial for long-term recovery.
So it's not one or the other, it's both the physical and the emotional working together.
Exactly. They're totally intertwined.
Okay, so much to unpack here. But let's say someone's on this journey of trying to heal from trauma. How do they even know if they're making progress? What are the signs that things are actually moving in the right direction?
That's a great question. And remember that knot in the stomach that Vinny talked about feeling?
Yeah, after his loved one passed away.
Right. Well, he says that with true resolution, that knot disappears.
Wow, that must be an amazing feeling.
He describes it like a weight being lifted, just this feeling of lightness and freedom.
It's like you can finally breathe again.
Exactly. And along with that, he also noticed that flashbacks and nightmares become less frequent, less intense.
It's not that the memories are gone, but they don't have that same power over you anymore.
Right. The past doesn't intrude on the present as forcefully.
You can finally start to create some distance from it.
Yeah, and another big sign he talks about is being able to reflect on those past events without getting totally swept away by the emotions.
So you can look back with a sense of clarity instead of just feeling overwhelmed by fear or anger or whatever those big emotions are.
Exactly. It's like you're finally making peace with what happened.
That's powerful. What about that fear of being alone we were talking about earlier? Does that change too?
It does. For people who have truly healed, Vinny observed that alone time actually becomes a source of peace rather than fear.
Wow, so instead of avoiding it, you actually start to embrace it.
Right. It's like you're finally comfortable in your own skin and you don't need constant distractions or other people to fill the void.
That's a big shift. What about that emotional age freeze? Does that start to thaw out as well?
It absolutely does. He says, as you heal, your emotional maturity actually starts to catch up with your chronological age.
Interesting.
So you start developing healthier relationships, better self-regulation, just a deeper sense of wholeness overall.
Wow, it sounds like a really beautiful process of becoming your true self.
It really is. But Vinny's also very clear that it's not something that happens overnight.
Oh, for sure. I mean, dealing with trauma is hard work.
It is, and he stresses that resolution is a journey, not a quick fix.
It's about being patient with yourself and trusting the process.
Exactly. Now, he does believe that working with a therapist who specializes in trauma can be incredibly helpful, even transformative.
Right, because they can provide that guidance and support along the way.
Yeah, but he also acknowledges that self-help can be valuable too.
So it's not an either-or situation.
Not at all. And, he also had some interesting advice on finding the right therapist.
Oh yeah, what was that?
He really encourages people to ask about the therapist's experience with trauma specifically and to not be afraid to ask those tough questions.
Like, what's your approach or how long do you think this will take, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. He emphasizes that it's your healing journey, so you want to make sure you feel totally comfortable with the person guiding you.
That's a great reminder. You have a choice in this process.
Absolutely. Now, there's one more concept from Vinny's work that I found really fascinating, and it's what he calls the spinning phenomenon.
Spinning. I don't think I've heard him talk about that.
It's a way of describing how unresolved trauma can trap us in this cycle of mentally replaying those painful events over and over again.
Like you're stuck in a loop, constantly trying to change the outcome or make sense of it all.
Exactly. And it can be absolutely exhausting.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine. It's like you're always looking back, never able to fully move forward.
Right. And Vinny actually observed this a lot with children in play therapy.
Oh, interesting. How so?
He found that by allowing them to act out their feelings and even change the ending of their traumatic experience through play, they were finally able to stop spinning.
So it's like they could rewrite the narratives in a way that gave them a sense of agency and control.
Exactly. And that was key to help them let go of that need to control or rewrite the past in their minds.
That makes a lot of sense. Like they were able to find a sense of closure that they couldn't find in real life.
Yeah, and it's like in that play therapy, they could find a different ending, one where they felt safe and empowered.
Yeah, it gives them a chance to process those emotions and work through the trauma in a way that feels manageable.
Exactly. And I think that's a really powerful takeaway for all of us, regardless of whether we're using play therapy or not.
For sure, it's like sometimes the key to healing isn't about changing what happened, but changing how we relate to it.
You got it. It's about finding that sense of agency, even if it's just in how we choose to view the past.
Okay, so much good stuff here, lots to think about. We've been diving deep into trauma resolution with Vinny Strumlow as our guide, looking at his blog post, that YouTube conversation, really trying to unpack this complex topic.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground for sure.
And what's become clear is that trauma can show up in so many different ways. And that healing, true resolution, it's an inside job. It's not something that just happens passively.
Definitely not a quick fix.
No, it's about, confronting those deep-seated beliefs that might be holding us back, those emotional patterns that we've developed as a result of the trauma.
And we've also touched on that idea of the emotional age freeze, where a part of us can get stuck at the age we were when the trauma happened.
Right, and how that can affect our relationships and our ability to cope with stress as adults.
And we can't forget about that link between unresolved trauma and addiction, how those two can be so intertwined.
Absolutely. And then there's that spinning phenomenon where we get caught in that loop of replaying the painful events over and over in our minds.
Trying to change the outcome, trying to make sense of it all.
Exhausting.
It is, but for me, what really sticks out from all of this is that trauma resolution, it's not just about feeling better, it's about reclaiming your life.
Yeah, it's about becoming the author of your own story, taking back that control that the trauma might have stolen from you.
Exactly, and it's about embracing the transformative power of healing, recognizing that even though trauma can leave you feeling broken, it doesn't have to define you.
So powerful.
It is, and if there's one thing I hope you take away from this deep dive, it's that message. Trauma can be incredibly difficult, but there is hope for healing. There's a path towards wholeness. And with the right support and a willingness to do the work, you can break free from that spinning and move forward with a sense of peace and maybe even, dare I say, gratitude for the strength and resilience you've discovered along the way.
Could have said it better myself. That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, take care.